Hi, welcome to My Comic Crush. I'm Vickie Sebring, and I love comics. So let's dive into a long box and see what we find. With me today is my co-host, Scott Sebring.
Hey there.
And today we're going to be discussing The Sandman, Dream Country. Specifically issue number 20. Technically, this is volume 2 of The Sandman. I believe there was an earlier incarnation, or a different book perhaps called The Sandman.
The only thing I could think of is probably the Golden Age, though somebody's probably screaming at me right now.
I'm sure somebody out there in fandom is screaming and pulling out their hair, but
we're really talking about the Neil Gaiman run from
this is the Neil
early
Gaiman,
90s.
Yes, the fabulous Neil Gaiman. Published date was October of 1990, and the title of this issue is Facade, and this is a really incredible single issue story. It's unbelievable. It's so powerful. This is one that's going to stay with you in your mind for a long time. At least it has with me.
You know, the funny thing is, too, is that the name Neil Gaiman, nowadays people go, oh, Neil Gaiman, great writer and so forth. And people don't quite realize that while we're being exposed to this stuff, in these earlier comics of his, of how brilliant people didn't know yet.
Well, this was this series was definitely my first exposure to him. Later I went on and read books and all the rest, his TV scripts, everything. He's a brilliant writer. And this is a unbelievably powerful issue. However, I gotta preface this. I gotta say, the Sandman series is for mature readers only. It is at times deeply disturbing, and for some sensitive people, I'm sure nightmare-inducing. It's beautiful work, but it is not for the kiddies or for the... I wouldn't read it if I was depressed. I really wouldn't read it if I was depressed. It's very well done, but it is more of your darker comic vein and targeted for an adult audience. That said, this particular issue, which is the final appearance of the Elemental Girl, who is, her real name is Urania Blackwell, commonly referred to as Rainey. She first appeared in Metamorpho number 10 back in February of 1967, and this is her final appearance. This is where you find out what happened to her, and it is a study in the impact of isolation and loneliness and depression and mental illness. It is not an easy issue. It will not rest easy in your mind. It will be very thought-provoking, though. It's a hard, it hits you hard in the feels. And I have to say, I'm going to real quick just blow out the stats here real quick. The writer, as we mentioned, was Neil Gaiman. Penciler, Colleen Doran. Inker, Malcolm Jones III. Colorist, Steve Oliff. Letterer, Todd Klein. Assistant editor, Tom Payer. And editor, Karen Berger. And I gotta say, the pacing of this particular issue with the story and the art, I know I use this word a lot, but it's brilliant. This issue is once again almost a master class in comic pacing. The use of the art and the way that the story is paced with the art, even the use of silence in the book. Panels where there is nothing going on. There's no verbiage. There's no description. It's just a picture. But it tells the story. It accents the story. Especially in regards to her depression and her loneliness. There's a series very early on in in the story at the bottom of the page where it's just her sitting on the couch. And in the first panel, it's daytime and she's sitting on the couch, and you do get some description of what's going on. And then the second panel, it's evening and she's still sitting there in the same position, and there's nothing. There's no writing, there's no description, there's nothing. And then the next one you get, it's morning and there's a little bit of description. And it's just like you feel the isolation and her pain just by the fact that she sat there through a 24-hour cycle, not moving. And that middle panel where there's nothing but her sitting in the dark in the same position, unmoving. It's just impactful. It's beautifully done. The story revolves around the elemental girl, Rainey. At this point in her life, she's been pensioned out of the CIA. She used to be a CIA operative. That's how she wound up being exposed to the Orb of Ra and turning into the elemental girl in the first place. She was on a mission for the CIA. And things happened. It wasn't something she wanted. It wasn't something she signed up for. She was an agent. She went where she was told, did what she was told to do. She was following orders. She wasn't looking to become a superhero. She certainly wasn't looking to become one of the metamorphae. If you are familiar with the character that most people know the metamorphae from, which is Rex Mason, Metamorpho, you know that he himself has had a lot of issues with being one of these beings. They're no longer human. They are no longer flesh. They no longer look like human. Their bodies no longer work like human bodies. They can transmute themselves into any element, anything. But as she says here in this particular issue, she says, you would think if you can turn yourself into anything in the world that turning into flesh would be easy. You'd be wrong. You know, I tried it once. I couldn't get rid of the smell of rotting meat for 2 weeks. Ew. And that has a psychological impact, you know. It's had a psychological impact on Rex, and it had a huge psychological impact on Rainey. She feels very isolated, very alone. And at this point in her life, she has been pensioned out of the CIA. She's basically on disability. And she sits alone in her apartment day after day, smoking. Because smoking makes her feel normal. It does nothing to her. Although she does kind of wish it would kill her, which it would if she were really human. She'd, get cancer eventually and die. But because she's not human, her body doesn't, just processes poisons. They have no effect on her at all. Toxins have no effect on her at all. And this is also part of what's adding to her psychological trauma. She's totally isolated. She feels unbelievably lonely. Her only human contact appears to be the guy at the disability office for the CIA, who she calls once a week just to hear a human voice to inquire about her check, which she knows is coming anyways, but she's just calling to hear the human voice, to have an interaction with this, with another human, because, as she says, nobody calls, nobody cares anymore. And she's just all alone. And she would really love to end it all. She would. You find this out a little further into the story as you get into it. The first part of this story, you are very powerfully depicted her isolation, her loneliness, her desperate loneliness. She tries to, she makes this call to Mulligan, who's the guy at the disability office, to inquire about the check. And she tries to draw it out as long as she possibly can. She tries to keep him on the phone. She tells him about how she's just been crying and unable to stop, and she has no one to talk to, and she's sorry to lay it on him, but she has nobody to talk to. And she even tries to come on to him a little bit. You've seen my file, you know what I used to look like. I can even feel like flesh. I may not be able to look like flesh, but I can feel like flesh. Although she can do a reasonable short-term workaround to look more normal, but it doesn't last. She grows a silicate face, as she refers to it. It looks pretty normal, but eventually it dries up and hardens and falls off. But for however long it lasts, maybe a day or so, it gives her at least the appearance of looking like herself. And then she makes her hair out of metals, which she says looks pretty good as long as nobody touches it, but nobody ever touches it.
So the silicate face that falls off actually becomes quite an image repeated in this story.
It is all over this story. It is because she finds herself unable to just throw these faces away. They're a part of her. Granted, they've hardened and fallen off, but they're still a part of her. And there is a very interesting dialogue that happens later in the book regarding these faces and masks. It's not just with regards to her, but with regards to people in general. How we all have these masks or these identities that sometimes we wear and sometimes we hold on to long after we've outgrown them.
But I mean, of course, this one's called Facade. And these masks that she accumulates, one's like used as an ashtray.
One she uses as an ashtray.
Like hung on the wall, almost like a picture.
They're everywhere. They're everywhere throughout the book. The masks are a very strong presence throughout this story and the art. But back to this phone call. At the end of the phone call, he's at work. He has other vets he has to process and deal with every day. And she's probably not the only one kind of reaching out to him like this. The themes that are expressed here are not solely something that she's dealing with. They are very prevalent in our society across all, with the elderly, the disabled. It's such a prevalent issue, loneliness and isolation and mental health and depression. Maybe that's why I feel this is such an impactful issue. But she's mad at herself after she gets off the phone call with him because she wishes she had waited till later in the week to call him, because now she can't call him for a whole nother week. So it's going to be a whole nother week till she has any interaction with anyone, as far as she knows.
So she used up her giving him the call for free call.
Right, because she wishes she'd held off. She'd been a little stronger and held off, because now she has to wait so long before she can call him again. And then this is where you get that section of panels that I mentioned, where she's just sitting there in the same position on the couch, and day turns to night, turns to day, and she has not moved at all. And that series actually ends at the very last panel on that series. There's a little thought process bar that says, "Nobody cares anymore." It's so, it just illustrates her mental state and where she is so eloquently. You turn the page and you get a full page splash with just a few inset panels, and the phone's ringing, and she is terrified because the phone is ringing. She is freaking out and panicking because the phone is ringing. The phone never rings. And she's really kind of got to steel herself to answer it. I mean, this is somebody who's so desperate for human contact, but when it's offering itself on a plate, she's terrified to reach out and accept it. But when she does finally answer it, it's someone she hasn't talked to in over 5 years, who she knew from back in when she was in the CIA, another operative. And once she realizes who she's talking to, There's a lovely illustration here that's a close-up of her face while she's on the phone. And you can see such joy. For that brief moment, there is such joy that there is a human that she knows that called her. The simplest thing, a call from someone that she has not heard from in 5 years, who has no idea that she's the elemental girl and what happened to her, but who's reached out to her out of the blue and wants to set up a lunch date. And that small little encapsulation of joy is quickly replaced by the resurgence of her fears and anxieties. So she agrees and sets up this lunch date, and then she hangs up, and now she's dreading the fact that she has to grow one of these, what she calls, she has to put on her face. She has to make one of these silicate faces for herself, so that she can go out in public. And apparently this is a bit of an involved process that happens at least partially while she's asleep. And she really dreads it because the process of making a more normal or human appearing face brings on dreams. And she hates dreams. She gets either 2 types of dreams, she says. She gets nightmares or terrible dreams. The nightmares she can deal with because she wakes up eventually and they were just nightmares and they're gone. The truly terrible dreams are the dreams she has where she's normal again. And she's got a normal life with a normal job. Sometimes she has a husband. Sometimes she has kids. And those are the dreams that she describes as being truly terrible because when she wakes up, they're gone and she's still the way she is and she has no one and nothing and she is still the freak, as she calls herself. During this dream that she's having, you once again see her encounter the orb of Ra. In the dream, she goes through the process that made her the elemental girl again, although she describes it as not being exactly the same way as it happened, that the dream is subtly different.
But this is also a way for readers that are being first introduced to her.
Which is, I was totally unfamiliar with this character. I'd never encountered her before. I'd never even heard of her before. Now, I did know Metamorpho, Rex Mason. I was familiar with his character because I followed Batman and the Outsiders. But this was my first exposure to the Elemental Girl. Basically, her last appearance ever. Still, having no previous connection with this character, I was still extremely moved by her plight, shall we say, by her story. I don't think you need to have a previous connection, and you do get her backstory right here in this dream sequence. You know what kind of happened to her, and in the dream sequence, you see her dream, but then it ends with a picture of her laying on the bed asleep while she's in the process of growing this face. And you can just see the tears streaming down her face. This whole issue is just so emotionally impactful. If you're not moved by her plight, and if it doesn't give you, or at least feel like it gives you a little bit of a window into this sort of an issue, people who do deal with isolation and depression and loneliness, I don't know what will. I think it's so well done. And I know I've said that a 20 million times already, but it really, to me, does stand up there as one of the best standalone issues I've ever read. Just one for the brilliance in the writing, the brilliance with the art combined with the writing, and just the impactfulness of this story. As I said, it stays with you in your head. For me, it stayed for years. When I first decided to start this podcast again, I knew that this was one of the issues that I wanted to cover very early on, without a doubt. But back into it. So eventually she does wake up. She's grown her face. She does her metal thing with her hair, so she looks fairly like she used to look, a blonde, beautiful woman. And as she says, you can cover up everything else. She wears gloves and a big coat and boots, and so all she needs really is the face and the hair. And then she steels herself and goes out to meet her friend for lunch. And she encounters her friend at a restaurant in a mall surrounded by people. And there's a real shift in the tonal colors and values of the art. Everything is a bit darker before. There are some, I mean, there's still color, but there is a definite shift from darkness
much more
to
muted
light.
And grayed out.
There's a definite shift from darkness to light when she's out and exposed and in the populace. And she's meeting with her friend for lunch, who she hasn't seen in 5 years. And the reason her friend reached out to her is because her friend's still with the CIA. She's still with the company. But since Rainey is not anymore, she's pensioned out, she's on disability, she's kind of safe for her friend to talk to. And her friend is in a situation where she's been having an affair with someone else in the company who's married. And she's pregnant. And she's in her late 30s, early 40s. And she just had to tell somebody. She had to tell somebody. She's still trying to figure out what to do. And she needed somebody to talk to. And she thought of Rainey because, as I said, Rainey is no longer technically in the company. But she's still kind of safe to talk to. She knows the environment. So they're starting their lunch, and her friend is just rattling on all about herself. Just all about. There's a little touch in there where, she asks how she's doing and why she left, and Rainey tells her she has a skin disease. She had to leave because she had a skin disease, and that's why she's not taking her gloves off and anything else. And her friend goes with that. But there is a period where her friend looks outside the window and she sees a bunch of disabled kids. Kids in wheelchair, kids dealing with different, and she calls them freaks. And she's telling Rainey that, she's older. What if her kid turns out like that? She just couldn't deal with it. They make her skin crawl. And Rainey's like, they're not freaks. They're just people, and this is, wow, this is all sorts of layers of double whammy for this character because she considers herself to be a freak. And here's her friend looking at normal people who just have normal disabilities and telling her that they make her skin crawl. And, what would she think of her if she knew the truth? It's like, so many layers here when you really start to think about what's going on. It's so layered. But as they're going on, suddenly her friend's like, Rainey, what's wrong with your face? And you see in the artwork, suddenly there's this like dark oval circle.
Well, you're really looking...
You're looking through her point of view, Rainey's point of view. And suddenly there's this like dark oval circle that's tilted. And basically her face falls off in the middle of lunch.
Right in the spaghetti.
Right in the spaghetti. Sauce everywhere. And as you can imagine, for Rainey, this is like the worst possible thing. If her friend is simply like stunned speechless, but Rainey is just, her mask has been stripped away. She's been laid bare, and there she is in her freak face, shall we say, as she would think of it. And
completely humiliated,
completely exposed and vulnerable to a woman who has already shown herself not to be an empathetic ear. She's not going to get any support from this woman, not real support. So Rainey just gets up and runs out crying. I mean, it's just, she can't deal with it. She can't cope with this. She was trying so hard to have an interaction with somebody, and it's just been totally shattered and destroyed. She just runs out, leaves her purse behind her, runs out. Runs all the way back to her apartment. She gets to the door. She realizes she doesn't have her purse, so she doesn't have her keys. So because she's the elemental girl, she turns her hand into magnesium and burns her way through the doorknob and opens the door that way and leaves it open behind her. And she just goes in and sits down and starts crying. And her first thought is she'll call Mulligan, the guy at the disability office. He'll know how to figure this. He'll know what to do. He'll know how to fix it. And so she calls him in desperation, and she gives his extension, and she's told that he's no longer there. He's been moved to another department. Her one human contact that she's had for however long, the only person who's ever been a sympathetic ear for her for such a long time, is gone. No way to get a hold of him. No. And she's freaking out and panicking, and then she just, boom, she shuts down. She's like, boom, no. She hangs up. She shuts down. And she just sits on the bed. She's at the end of her rope. She is just totally and emotionally cracked and broken. And all she's wanting to do is to kill herself. And she doesn't know how. She's not human anymore. And she's just crying. She doesn't have anything left. She's just crying. And then suddenly a stranger walks in and sits down beside her and says, "Hello. Do you want to talk about it?" Now, for anybody who's familiar with the series, they will recognize the stranger as the character Death. Of course, the elemental girl does not recognize her at Death. She basically looks like a goth chick. A little pale, but just, a goth chick. And Rainey is like, "How did you get in?" And she's like, the door was open. I heard you crying. You looked like you might need somebody to talk to. And she's like, "Maybe I do." So she starts talking to this total stranger who just happens to appear, because sometimes it's easier to talk to a stranger. But she just starts to pour it all out. Her unhappiness, her loneliness, and all the ways she's thought of or tried to think of to end it all. And the fact that none of them will work. Or she's not sure enough that any of them will work. That her fear is that she'll stand at ground zero in a nuclear test and still live through it, only be radioactive so she can't go near anyone. Or if she turns herself into a gas and spreads out over the atmosphere or into water molecules and spreads into the sea, that she'll still have some form of consciousness when all she wants is for it to end. So she's unburdening herself to death. She's talking about how it's, all she wants to die. All over the world, people are trying not to die. But all she wants is the oblivion, as she says. And she even tells Death about her faces and how they dry up and fall off. And she and Death have this very interesting conversation about masks or facades and how we all wear them and have trouble maybe letting go of them when we should. And they have this really amazing conversation. First, it's all about Rainey and her desire to die. How she has no idea how to end it all. And at the end of that conversation, Death is like, "Well, everything dies eventually, Rainey. Even the metamorphe, it just takes longer." And she talks about how Rainey and Metamorpho witnessed a metamorphe die in a volcano who was 2,000 years old. How his metamorphic field gave up and he just... That's the only way to describe it, is... At least based on the pictures. And Rainey's like, "How do you know this? There were only you weren't there. There was just me and Rex there. How do you know this?" And she's like, "I was there." And Rainey's like, "Who are you?" And she's like, "Don't you know?" And then she does know. She realizes that this is Death, and she is so happy because she thinks Death has come for her finally. She's come to give her the peace and the oblivion she wants. However, as it turns out, Death isn't here for her. She was just passing. She was here for somebody upstairs who slipped and fell. And, and she is death, but she's not Rainey's death. At least not at this point in time. She does this really nice speech, shall we say, that really sums up who she is and what it is that she does in this universe. It's nice, it's concise, it's compact. If you haven't been exposed to the character of Death, it's boom, you get it in a nutshell, right there. But of course, when the elemental girl finds out that she's not here for her, she's just passing by and heard somebody crying and thought they might need somebody to talk to. Of course, she's very sad again. She's swinging all over the place. And Death tells her, look, these Parthenons, these systems of beliefs, these gods, they're very powerful when they have their believers, and they hang on for a long time afterwards. If she really wants to end it all, the person she should talk to is Ra, who made her this way. And the elemental girl's like, well, I can't go to Egypt. And she's like, no, the orb of Ra that made you is just another mask. It's another face, just like the sun is a face because Ra was a sun god. Just open the blind and talk to the sun before it sets. And that's what she does. She opens the blind. And Death is like, but be respectful. Be polite. Don't be all... It's never good to not be polite with greater powers, Just a word of advice. So she does. She goes to the window, she opens the blind, and she starts to have an interaction where she's talking to the sun. And even though we don't hear or see any response, we hear from her dialogue that she's hearing a response, or at least believes she is. And this whole time she's shading her eyes because it's the sun, it's bright, so she's shading her eyes. And as part of the interaction, the sun apparently tells her to look at it. Look at the sun. And she's like, well, you're not supposed to look directly at the sun, but okay. So she drops her hand and you flip the page and there's this beautiful, huge, glowing sunset. And it's beautiful. It's so filled with light. It's almost like somebody shone a flashlight in the comic. It's so well done with the pacing. And she's looking at it. And she says, it's so beautiful. And she says, I never realized the sun is a mask itself, and the face behind it is so beautiful. And that's the point at which she dies. And it is so well done. It is so delicately handled. It moves me to tears, I have to say. It impacts me so strongly. You feel her joy, and you feel the cessation of her pain. Now, I understand suicide is, wow, it's a complex issue. It's really touchy. There's a lot of viewpoints. And personally, it's not something that I would condone or choose, but we're not going to go into that here. We're just looking at the story, this issue. And right here with this person, this character, you feel her release. It is such a moving issue. It is such a moving story, and the depiction of it is handled so brilliantly and delicately. I cannot give enough kudos to this team here on the production of this book. It is perfect. For what it is, for this story, it is perfect. And then you're left with death. And she says, better luck next time to Rainey. And the phone rings. And it's Mulligan trying to reach her, who I guess somebody notified him that she had desperately called trying to reach him. And Death is like, no, she doesn't live here anymore. No, I really couldn't say where she's gone. Who is this? Just a friend. Maybe. Sometimes. Be seeing you. And that's it. There's some artwork panels, but that's really where the story ends. The silence at the end of this story is as strong and impactful as the story itself. The way that it is used throughout the book, once again, beautifully done. And that wraps it up. It's a bit of a heavier podcast this week, but I really do hope you will take the time to check this issue out. It's gonna always be one of my top ones. I got a lot of top issues. I love a lot of comics, but this one will stay in your head and you'll find yourself thinking about it at odd times. And I think sometimes that's the mark of really great art, that it stays with you and it's in the back of your head and you find yourself thinking about it at random points and analyzing it or realizing things about it even years down the line. Things occur to you. So well done, guys. Beautifully done. And that's where we're going to leave it this week. I hope you'll come back and join us again next week for our next podcast. And until then, I'm Vickie Sebring.
And I'm Scott Sebring.
And this has been My Comic Crush. My Comic Crush is a production of Sebring Arts. Executive producers Vickie Sebring and Scott Sebring. Sound production and theme music by Scott Sebring. Special guest provided by Blackmail and Shameless Baking. For more episodes in this series, you can visit our website at mycomiccrush.com or find us on iTunes, Podcast Republic, or wherever fine podcasts can be found. That's all for now, so go out and read something.